So Iram Aranara Harris, Lauertling, Anish.
Sorry, big walkover. Good afternoon to you all, and thank you very much for having me here in Wexford for what is my first ever TUI Congress in person. I tried to join you remotely at your technological university conference in Limerick recently. I was going through COVID at the time, so you had to listen to me scratching to speak, but I'm in fine fettle today, and I'm delighted to be here with you. And I really want to thank your General Secretary, your Executive, your President for the invitation to be here with you. I'm very conscious that I'm the first ever Cabinet Minister for Further and Higher Education to address a TUI Congress. Indeed, I'm the first ever full stop. We now have a Department of Further and Higher Education. And my message today is that I want to work with you, that I'm here to work with you, and that I want to advocate for our sector. Because for far too long, further and higher education has lived in the shadows. It's lived in the shadows when it's come to policy, and it's lived in the shadows when it's come to funding. And that has to end. It has to end now. And that's why I'm here with you today. So to start, I'd like to thank the TUI sincerely. I want to thank all your members for the work that you've done throughout the COVID pandemic, for the flexibility, the adaptiveness, the problem-solving approach. I used to meet with Annette nearly every Friday as we worked through the issues on the COVID steering committee. And I don't say this lightly, and I do say it sincerely. Thank you very much for all the work that you did, because it became very clear to me from the very first time that I met you that you were always putting the needs of the students first. That was always your purpose. There was no playing games. It was always about how do we look after the student, how do we look after the learner, and how do we keep people safe. And I want to sincerely thank you for that, and it's my first opportunity to thank you in person. Of course, sadly, as we've begun to move somewhat, though it's not over, from a COVID emergency, a new massive challenge has, of course, emerged in our world and therefore also emerged in our country. The tragic, horrific situation in Ukraine is having a very profound effect across Europe in all areas of life. And of course, it's disrupting the lives and the education of so many thousands of Ukrainian students, Ukrainian children. In Ireland and across all European countries, you're well aware that we've already begun the process of welcoming students, welcoming pupils, welcoming them into universities, into colleges and into schools. And I want to thank the delegates for the important role you play in welcoming displaced young people to our country. We cannot allow the next generation of Ukrainian leaders be deprived their access to education and the opportunity to finish their studies. It is, of course, putting pressures on our education system. There's no two ways about that. There's no point pretending it isn't. Of course it is. Pressure on places, pressure on teachers, pressure on lecturers. But these are pressures that together we're morally bound to embrace in solidarity with Ukraine, in solidarity with democracy, and with Europe and all that we stand for. I know many people here and many of those you represent have been working diligently to support those entering the education system. Particularly, I want to thank people for the work being done in relation to providing English language support where needed. I know we can count on your continued support, but I also know we've got to work really closely together to find solutions and ways forward. We know how much this sense of normality for a young person in these times can mean. People who were living normal lives only 50-odd days ago, now uprooted from those homes, uprooted from their lives. I'm aware there's been challenges in relation to the recognition of prior learning. However, again, these are ones that we can work our way through, and we're morally bound, and crucially, we want to do this. We want to do everything we can to support the people of Ukraine. And while we've been unequivocal in relation to that, we need to do better as a further and higher education system in terms of coordinating our response. And that's why today at your Congress, I want to announce that from next week, we will have established a new one-stop shop, an information desk for any Ukrainian student who comes to Ireland and wants to continue their studies. This is something I discussed with your leadership. I think it will simplify the process. It will be a help desk made up of guidance counsellors and other experts, including 6 people from admission offices right across the higher education sector. They'll be able to direct the students to a local college, they'll be able to advise the students and provide them with the supports and information. And as I say, that help desk, that one-stop shop, will be operational from next week. So our priorities in our education system have to be to welcome, support and meet the needs of students, teachers and researchers who are displaced. And I'm convinced that this new structure we're putting in place will achieve that. I know you'll support this venture in any way you can. Indeed, I know it's something you've been looking to happen, and I very much want to thank you in relation to that. I now want to turn to, and I'm sure you want me to turn to, the very important issue of funding. And I think this is a really important issue because my department has been established. We've got to get this right. There can be no more ducking and diving and ignoring the reality about funding when it comes to further and higher education. This is a sector that's catering for the needs of about 450,000 of our people in some manner or form right across this country. And we need to build on the strengths that we already have, the strengths that we've already seen. There's more pressing needs now with the challenges that we know are emerging, be they the pandemic, the geopolitical events, or climate action as well. And funding is, of course, something that concerns each and every one of us. It's something that concerns me as well. Policy decisions that we've taken since the publication of Cassell's in 2016, and especially in recent budgets, have factually taken significant steps to address the funding needs of the sector. For example, our last budget saw an extra €138 million go into higher education, and crucially, 118 of this goes into core funding. We're now spending over €2 billion on the higher education sector, more than ever before, including exceeding the last peak in 2008. But of course, you're doing a lot more too. You're accommodating a lot more students. There's a lot more demands and demographic pressures. When it comes to apprenticeships and Springboard, we've seen funding increase there as well, and we now have a 5-year human capital initiative introduced through our National Training Fund. I'm pleased to say when it comes to capital funding, an area that's really been neglected, particularly in relation to further education. I see the most amazing things happening in further education across the country, but in facilities that are simply not fit for purpose. I'm delighted that we now have €700 million to spend in capital funding between now and 2025. And again, objectively, this is a step change in terms of funding levels. So yes, there has been some tangible progress, but we've a lot more to do. And I want to tell you that next week, I intend to go to government with our response to the future funding issue. But I also want to say, and I've been talking to TUI about this, I've been talking to lecturers and teachers across the country and students in relation to this new investment has to make a difference. This can't just be a blank check for an autonomous institution, see you later. It's far too important. We need to make sure that this additional investment delivers the education sector that you want to work in and the education sector that our citizens need. So I want to outline today 2 priority areas that I want to see delivered on as a result of increased investment. The first is reductions in lecturer-student ratios, teacher-student ratios in further and higher education. This is key. It leads to better student outcomes, it leads to better working conditions, it leads to improved rankings and ratings for our education system. We need to drive down the ratio of lecturer to student, teacher to student in the third level education system. And the second is we need to have better pathways between further and higher education. When did we become so obsessed in this country with the points race? Why have we decided to put this ridiculous amount of pressure on people at 17 and 18 to decide what they want to do with the rest of their life? I have been in so many secondary schools across the country, and I have seen the fear, the nervousness, the anxiety in the faces of young people. It's not right, and just so we know, it's not normal internationally. We need to fix this. We need to make sure we put pathways in place for people to go from school into further education and get their qualification in higher education. This idea of it's all about the CAO has to end, and it's going to end. So I really ask for your support in relation to this. It's not right. It's not right that you could have... It's not right that I was able to visit a college of further education, and from the window of that College of Further Education, I could see a now technological university. In here, they provide the pre-nursing course. In there, they provide the nursing degree. And we see students leaving the pre-nursing course with the best marks possible, heading to Scotland, heading to the UK, heading to Northern Ireland for a nursing degree. Those days must end. So my message to the university sector is simple. More money's coming, more investment's coming, but we want lower student-teacher ratios, and we want pathways between further education and higher education. That's what I want to work with you on, and I really would appreciate your support in relation to that. I'm conscious talking at your Congress, and indeed, quite frankly, talking anywhere, whether you're talking in the shop, whether you're talking on the garage forecourt, whether you're talking around the kitchen table, whether you're talking in the local pub. The cost of living is causing real pressure for everybody. Everything's going up. It's costing more money to fill the car. It's costing more money to put food on the table. Prices are rising in Ireland, and across Europe. And we need to respond to that. And we need to respond to it by sitting down with public sector unions and commencing a discussion on a public sector pay agreement. We need a new agreement that will underpin pay for public servants, and we need it by the end of the year. And that, President, is my response to many of your requests today in relation to how we address the cost of living. Let's get in the room and let's have that discussion about how we hammer out a pay deal for public servants before the end of the year. We've also got to get better at talking to each other. We've got to get better at working through the issues and working through them quickly and not letting issues drag on and drag on. So my department is in the process of establishing the Higher Education Sector Oversight Group. This is a new development. It'll be the first time it's happened in the higher education sector. It'll be an oversight group chaired by the WRC. It'll bring together unions, it'll bring together employer representatives and my department. It will be an effective forum to help resolve disputes pertinent to higher education. I think this is an important step forward and another key measure to help ensure the industrial relations mechanisms for the higher education sector are fit for purpose. If I can, I just want to return to two important policy areas. Improving equity of access to higher education is an ongoing objective of mine and my department. I want to thank you because together the third level sector has achieved an awful lot in relation to improving access, particularly for people with disabilities, to third level. But there's an awful lot more that we need to do. We need to do more to increase diversity, and we need to do more to increase access and successful participation for students and groups which are currently underrepresented. As you know, our third National Plan for Equity of Access or Higher Education, or NAP as we called it, expired at the end of December. And we're now working on developing a new plan. This new National Access Plan will set out our ambition for achieving a more inclusive and diverse student population in higher education. It's at a very advanced stage, and colleagues in my department are currently drafting a memo for government, and I look forward to publishing this new plan before the summer. The new plan will be more student-centred, it will have a strong focus on pathways, and it will have an increased focus on student success. And today I want to let you know that I intend for this plan to apply a particular focus to students with intellectual disabilities and with autism. I must say, when I became minister, I was somewhat shocked that we don't even measure participation rates in third level education. We don't even bother measuring it. So people can tell me how well we're doing in terms of improving disability rates, and we are, but we're only telling half the story. Because I've met parents of children with Down syndrome, and they've cried. And they've cried to me and they've said, not only am I not watching my child progress after second level education like other parents, I'm watching them regress in front of my own eyes. We've got to end that. The new National Access Plan will have ring-fenced funding, €3 million a year, to put into pathways for people with intellectual disabilities and autism and help them transition from second level into third level. And I really look forward to working with the TUI on making this an absolute reality. I'm absolutely convinced that a more unified approach across the further and higher education and research sectors can lead to more joined-up opportunities. We've got to meet the different needs of individual learners through their working and personal lives. We need greater collaboration, and we need unified regional systems. We need to provide more choice, a more extensive range of pathways, all equally valued. Not this idea that if you go this way, you've gone the right way in life, but if you go that way, it's a lesser choice. Removing barriers to facilitation will facilitate lifelong learning and will develop diversity of talent. These aren't new ideas. They're ideas that have been championed by the TUI for many, many years. Your members are to the forefront in supporting greater access and inclusion. I know that you welcomed the changes we introduced to the CAO portal, where for the very first time, shockingly, a Leaving Cert student, when they go to the CAO website, is seeing the traditional university options, but now also seeing the further education and training options and able to apply online and seeing information about apprenticeships and how you can access more guidance, counselling and supports in relation to that. This is an important step. It's only a step though, but it is important because it helps change the conversation around the dinner table. It helps change the conversation between the son or daughter with the mum or dad or with their friend or colleague. And I'm pleased to say it's working. And how do we know it's working? Because we can see the figures. Since November, there have been over 27,000 unique visits channelled through the CAO platform to further education. So this is encouraging. More and more now students are looking at the further education options. Of course, our apprenticeships are employer-led and they do differ, so the application process can't exactly mirror the other options in that portal. But we will work with the TUI, we'll work with your members, we'll work with students, we'll work with parents, we'll work with everyone to make sure that we now take further steps to creating, through that portal, a unified third-level education system where we don't hide some of the options from our young people. The amount of apprentices I meet around the country in their 30s, and I ask them, did you go straight into school from this? They nearly laugh at me. They say, sure, no one ever told me about it. We have to actually make sure that all of these issues, the apprenticeships, further education training, are up there in lights, and they're seen as equally viable ways to get a third-level education. And I accept there's more that we need to do, but I do believe I have a unique opportunity and responsibility as a Minister for further and higher education. We didn't just stick in the extra words to create a longer title. The reason further is there is because we think it is as important as higher, and it needs to click, it needs to connect, it needs to work. So I intend in the coming weeks to develop a policy approach that will show you and engage with you and how we intend to bring the complementary strands of further and higher education and research closer together. I intend to bring greater detail to government in relation to this, and then I want to open a process of consultation and engagement with the TUI and others. I look forward to working with learners, with staff, with institutions and with stakeholders so that together we can create a more integrated approach to tertiary education and move beyond the narrow, snobby, elitist attitude we've developed and make sure we have an inclusive model that puts the learner first. And our FET strategy, the further education and training sector, our 5-year strategy, sets out a very ambitious agenda right across how we build skills, how we foster inclusion and how we facilitate pathways as well. And this strategy will build the FET contribution to a more collaborative and cohesive national tertiary education system. We've got to simplify the FET structure, improve access, support learners, and we've got to create new FET colleges of the future. And I want you to know that as part of that, we're matching it with money, because this is important too. We're going to spend 45% of our total allocation for capital on further education and training buildings, so that we don't tell people this is equal and that's equal, but they're in the shiny building and you're in the rundown former secondary school. We need to actually start investing in the capital infrastructure, and that's what we will do with 45% of our capital going into further education and training. And I think that will show I want to talk to you about the Technological University agenda, and I can do so with greater fluidity than I tried this the last time at a TUI conference in Limerick. And I'm conscious that we're standing in the southeast. This is a part of the country which has been without a university for a long number of years. It's had the excellent IT Carlow, the excellent Waterford Institute of Technology, but for years, if not longer, there have been debates, will they ever get a university? There's been stops, there's been starts, there's been false dawns. In 10 days' time, the Southeast will finally have a university. But I want you to know this isn't about name changes, this isn't about new letterheads, this isn't about cutting ribbons. This is actually about a major change in terms of how we deliver third-level education in the regions. And I want to say this too. I accept there'll be a healthy degree of scepticism about this until you see the step change that needs to happen as well. And I'll work with you in relation to this, because this is a journey. And in fact, when a technological university is established, that's not the end of the conversation. In many ways, it's just moving to the next phase, because we now have to work with you on how we make sure that we don't lose cohesion for the technological higher education sector. We need to make sure that we build on the strengths of our regional technical colleges and our institutes of technology, and that we don't lose all that was good about them. And also in terms of engagement with local and regional employers and enterprises and their emphasis that they put on student and learner access. We don't want to lose any of that. We don't want to lose their crucial role in the development of multifaceted higher vocational technological training. So we need to work with you to make sure the TUI model is fit for purpose. It's going to enable the establishment of institutions of far, far greater scale. We're talking 15,000, 20,000, almost 30,000 students in a technological university. And this matters, not because it's a big number, it matters because critical mass does matter when it comes to higher education. It allows them to crystallise their provision. It allows them to maximise their skills. It allows them to maximise the dedication and the creativity of their staff, to nurture enthusiasm and hunger for knowledge in their vibrant student population so they attract greater numbers of students, Students will be drawn to our TUs by the best of equipment, best facilities, academics and researchers in the regions. I was in Sligo recently for the launch of the Atlantic Technological University, and I could feel the pride in the region of having a vehicle that will not just be a vehicle for access to education, but will be a vehicle for balanced regional development and for investment and for jobs. There'll be an opportunity now to source funding through our National Recovery and Resilience Fund, through the European Regional Development Fund, through the capital investments that I just outlined. You'll be able to access all qualifications right along the spectrum, from apprenticeships to doctoral degrees in your region. And they'll have a clear emphasis and mandate when it comes to access and lifelong learning. Also when it comes to agile provision, online, distance and blended learning, ensuring that current strengths are recognised and fostered. So a TU is not some sort of pumped up institute of technology with a new and shinier name, nor is it meant to be a watered down traditional university. It's something new, it's something different. And it's not something that I've just decided standing here. The Turn Report has embedded this. The Turn Report sets out what an Irish technological university should strive to be. What is required for an Irish TU is set out in legislation. Each TU is to define itself in terms of its own unique characteristics, its own regional mission and its values. And as you know, I've been steadily working, laying foundations grounded in the TU legislation and the Turn Report. And we will see, as I've said, the 5th TU come into being within the next fortnight. But we're now moving to the next phase. Since 2013, almost €250 million has been invested in TUs, but we need to continue to invest in these new entities. I've taken steps to work towards a proper funding system that over time will see an equalisation between TUs and the traditional universities. This is important as well. You can't have in a city 2 universities, the traditional one and the technological one, and one getting more money than the other for a student. That needs to end, that needs to be equalised. That is now the policy direction, one pot of funding. We also need to develop a borrowing framework that would allow our technological universities to borrow from non-exchequer funded sources. This is really important, particularly when it comes to student accommodation, but also important more broadly. The idea that institutes of technologies couldn't borrow a bob to build student accommodation has led us to a situation where there's an acute shortage of student accommodation. We've now changed that, so our technological universities can now borrow to finally build college-owned student accommodation, and I think that's also important as well. In addition to this, my department will be continuing to work on lots of capital projects across the TUs, including in Grange Gorman, where we've turned another sod recently in terms of their new library and academic hub. We're advancing a significant public-private partnership programme which will deliver 11 new buildings across the TU sector, and funding of just over 150 million has already been allocated in areas such as apprenticeship capital, refurbishment, upgrade projects and decarbonisation. So there's 13 major projects across 9 campuses involving all 5 technological universities. We're supporting a second round of higher education strategic investment funds, which is open to all higher education institutions and will co-fund strategic projects also. But I'm also conscious it's not just about capital. We've got to make sure we invest in people, and we've got to make sure that the contracts in place work for you, work for learners, work for our education system. And I know this is a critical element. I know it's an element you'll be particularly interested in. We need an appropriate, fit-for-purpose career structure for academic staff in technological universities. This will require a new and groundbreaking type of academic contract that ensures staff are facilitated and encouraged and indeed rewarded for the many and varied roles that they fulfil. It needs to create a space for a concentration of pathways, be that pedagogical, research or engagement, and for some form of rotational academic leadership that will ensure there's progression both personally and in terms of the contribution of the goals of the TU. You'll all know that my own department and the HEA has commissioned a piece of analysis on what a TU academic career structure, contract and leadership should look like from the OECD. The finishing touches are being put to that report, and I expect to receive it shortly. My officials are undertaking preliminary discussions with our friends in the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform to bring them up to speed and make sure they're ready for the conversation as well, because we will need significant funding to ensure that new approaches to career structures and a new academic contract can be properly delivered. And I intend to bring the report to Cabinet in due course. But I want to say here today, in case there's any confusion, misunderstanding or misinformation in relation to this, the TUI will be consulted, the TUI will be involved in discussions moving forward, and let me be crystal clear, there will be no imposition of new contracts or new terms and conditions. This is an opportunity and nothing to be feared. What we're seeking to achieve is a phased, collaborative working through of necessary steps for bringing new structures in place. And there'll be interactions that will focus on outcomes, on how best to achieve what we all want, individually and collectively. And I've no doubt that engagement on these issues will be frank. I'm sure it'll even be robust, but I'm also confident that the engagement will be constructive, professional, and it'll get us to where we want to get to as well. I think the words in the title of the Tern report, connectedness and collaboration through connectivity, whilst not the snappiest, are very apt as we try to move forward. We want to connect staff and student with regional stakeholders and with management. We want to, we need to, we must collaborate and connect in the broadest sense, to hear and be heard, to make progress through honest debate and active discussion in appropriate forums. And I know too there may be some concern, and legitimate concern, at the relatively rapid pace of change. In the short space of 4 years, we've moved from 14 institutes of technology to 5 TUs and 2 institutes of technology, literally a halving of the number of institutes. This momentum, I think, has actually been building for a long time, though, since the Hunt report. And now that we have the foundation blocks in place, we've much to discuss in terms of the next steps we take together. I also, President, want to acknowledge that there's been some concern expressed that Dundalk IT and IADT Dunleary will be left behind. I want to assure you, though, this is not the case. You can blame me for many, many things, I'm sure, but every single application we've received for a technological university has been processed and been put in place, and the technological university set up. These are autonomous institutions. The governing bodies of the institutions need to submit applications, and when institutions do submit applications, you can believe us, based on our track record, that they will be dealt with professionally, speedily, and in a supportive manner. Of course, there's still room for diversity. Technological universities aren't mandatory, but we stand ready to assist, and indeed are assisting, through money and expert advice, both of these institutes within the parameters of what's possible under the existing policy. So I'm ready when they're ready, and we've given them the funding and we've given them the expert advice as well. I also know that there's been a massive amount of work undertaken on a different amalgamation, and that of St Angela's College in Sligo, with the newly established Atlantic TU to take place in due course. This is a project I've spent a lot of time on. When I first visited them, I thought they had a very clever idea. They gave me a framed picture of the college looking out over Lough Gill. So every day I see it as I walk into my office, it reminds me we've got to get the job finished in relation to St Angela's. And I'm delighted to say we're almost there. And I want to thank your Deputy General Secretary, Annette Dolan, for playing a key role in this regard. Officials in my department and the Attorney General's office are working to ensure there's a proper legislative basis for such a proposed amalgamation. But this is happening. St Angela's is going to become a part of the new Atlantic Technological University. And after years of being left in an uncertain position and in the wilderness, the question is now settled, and they will now join the Atlantic Technological University in due course. So I'm trying today to deliver a message that is genuine in terms of the need for collaboration. We have an awful lot of things we need to work on together. And we now have an opportunity with the first ever Department of Further and Higher Education, with a cabinet department to advocate for a sector which hasn't always had the strongest voice around the cabinet table. We now have the opportunity to bring about the change you desire, we desire, and to create an education system that will transform lives, families, communities, and our country. I ask you today to work with me. I assure you today that I will work with you, and we will get this done. We will bring about reforms that have been hanging around for far too long. We will move beyond the obsession with the points race, the pressure on the young people, to a broader, more inclusive education system that is fit for purpose, that accommodates all, and that makes sure we have a sustainable, robust economy and society into the future. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Congress. Gur míle mágah.
Buíochas am méid sin anis iarm ar uachtarán Aontas Múntairí na hÉireann Marjoram Fragar Hort Don Ara Harris.
Thank you. It is a pleasure, Minister, to welcome you and your officials to our annual Congress, this time in person. We continue to wish you and your department every success, knowing that this will bring success to TUI members and the students we support in an enormous range of programs and workplaces. Thank you for your address. Many of the things you said chime very well with much that is dear to us, as you could tell from reactions. And thank you as well for remotely attending our conference on technological universities, despite your illness at the time. Your focus on funding is important, Minister. As we emerge, we hope, from the worst of the pandemic, we note that it's starkly demonstrated the basic truth that the TUI has highlighted for many years, the shameful underfunding of Irish education historically. Anyone who doubts the TUI will hopefully believe the OECD. Their latest report shows that Ireland spends only 2/3 of the average proportion of national wealth on education. Already creaking at the seams from decades of underinvestment, we were desperately ill-prepared for the challenges thrust so suddenly upon us. The extraordinary efforts of staff and students and admirable achievements and successes, they must not be allowed to obscure the inequalities, the deficits in national infrastructure and social fabric, which made continued engagement with education an almost insurmountable task for those unfortunate enough to be among our least advantaged. Across higher, further and adult education, the message is universal, that the necessary funding continues to be withheld, with inevitable negative consequences for the life chances of those needing and deserving of the best the state can provide. The TUI welcomes and acknowledges recent improvements and the further indications you've given us today, Minister, of additional resources to allow our members to do what we have dedicated our careers to do, uplifting individuals, their families and whole communities through fair and accessible educational opportunities across the many sectors in which we operate. One area of long-standing concern to the TUI has been the inadequate support for students with additional and special educational needs as they transition into further and higher education. We are thankful, Minister, for your interest and indeed your passion that you've shown here, and we welcome the funding that you have announced. This is an issue which affects students most in need of support and assistance, and we look forward to the progress that you've signalled. We acknowledge your thanks as well with regards to our response to the pandemic. On a no-precedent basis, TUI members took on significant additional work to keep education operating and to allow our students to progress and build their lives and careers. While lessons and benefits can be taken from our shared experience, there can be no doubt that no precedent does mean what it says, and there must be no effort to leave our advantage from our goodwill and dedication. In spite of TUI members largely upskilling themselves in order to provide the highest quality learning experience for our students, some invariably fell behind, in most cases through absolutely no fault of their own, and any resulting deficits or challenges must be met with extra resources and support. As the world hopefully emerges from the pandemic, the despicable attacks by Putin's forces on the people of Ukraine have created an unprecedented humanitarian crisis in Europe, which has seen a swift and honourable response from Ireland. Members of the TUI are, and in increasing numbers will be part of the great effort to provide all possible support to those Ukrainians seeking sanctuary here from the horrors of this unjust war. The provision of the necessary resources and the coordination that you've spoken about must be prioritised as our institutions take up the vital role of allowing education to continue for many Ukrainians. The TUI and its members will be fully engaged and will do all which may support and sustain education for these families until they can return to rebuild their homeland. The identification and utilisation of capacity, as well as provision of additional services, including language and psychological supports, must be advanced through necessary consultation, with particular emphasis on being ready from the start of the next academic year. You told us at our conference in TU Shannon, Minister, and you've repeated today, your plan for a one-pot third-level funding model, which would be equitable for students, whether enrolled in a TU, an IOT, or a traditional university. The one-pot, Minister, needs to be substantially bigger than the two pots it replaces. You will recall in my response in Limerick that I immediately cautioned against unintended consequences too. We have seen too many instances in Ireland of so-called equality turning out to mean that some are more equal than others. The essential elements of our sector's success must receive the necessary resource, the class sizes, the practical focus, the easy access of students to lecturing staff, central to our approach, must not be undermined by funding decisions that fail to recognise or value what make our sector work to such outstanding effect. Tread carefully, Minister. In this case, you really do tread on our dreams and indeed on those of our students. We are hopeful and apprehensive in equal measure because of the lamentable lack of consultation with us on funding related to COVID-19. Welcome as the additional resources were, we are hard-pressed even now to know exactly where they were spent. Our early sensible claim for immediate steps to protect the ratio of students to lecturers went unheeded, indeed barely acknowledged. And the OECD has since identified an alarming increase, bringing Ireland from 33% above the average to a shocking 50% above the average, on a measure where above the average is the last thing you want to be, impacting as it does most on students in greatest need of support and individual engagement. Good as it is to hear your plans to reduce this ratio, all future funding proposals must be rooted in full consultation and focus on frontline provision. The long-awaited OECD report also appears to us in both the guise of a promise and a risk. Weekly lecturing hours settled on 40 years ago and an almost non-existent career path have stifled innovation and will render impossible the upward step change sought for TUs in research and engagement. A great reservoir of available talent and creativity has been dammed up for decades by a burden of teaching hours hugely in excess of international comparators. Minister, with your help, we can release this potential with enormous benefits flowing to society, to the national store of knowledge and expertise, to our students, communities and businesses. But we must exercise caution. Significant negotiations must follow the OECD's publication. And the TUI will protect both our sector's educational model and our own core values. TUI members will not vote for lesser terms for future colleagues, nor for a model with contact hours replaced by casualised or otherwise exploited staff, Minister. We need our workload to be addressed and we need a career path which will, as you say, equally value teaching, research and engagement, but only in conformity with our core values and our principles. No workload model in third level will make any sense without specific provision for the additional challenges and demands of online provision. Not least the extra time involved in design, delivery and student engagement for courses properly constructed as online. Our swift transition to emergency remote teaching has confused some into thinking that online courses are simply regular courses, with the lecturer sitting in a kitchen instead of a classroom. Blissful ignorance may have its place, but not in national negotiations with the serious intent to agree a workable national online agreement reflecting good negotiation outcomes arrived locally across more than half the sector. Minister, your department and the stubborn managements who prevented progress will not find a way around us. A national agreement on online is a necessity. The place of researchers in third level is marked globally by precarity, casualisation and exploitation. The TUI will not agree to replicate those ills. We will insist on parity of esteem in terms and conditions and salaries as near as possible to lecturing colleagues. We are dismayed, Minister, that 10 years after the effort started, researchers in our sector are still denied access to a pension scheme. This deplorable circumstance is inherited from the Department of Education and is commonly blamed on the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. But it will soon become a source of justifiable disgrace for your department if not dealt with. You must take this in hand, Minister, and guarantee that there will be no more delays in delivering this basic right to our researchers. This claim regarding terms, conditions and pensions for researchers is the perfect example of the ineffective nature of the IOTIR Forum, where it has languished literally for years, Minister. It is not that we do not value the forum. We do, greatly, along with the National Negotiation Forum and the ETB-IR Forum, and the agreements that all too infrequently emerge from them. Minister, all of these forums need to become far more effective and responsive. Claims and issues cannot be allowed to drift for years on end, as you have said yourself. The contrast with forums established to deal with the pandemic is stark. Not only do we want the VET Stakeholders Forum, POSITS and the steering group to continue, we want their spirit to be replicated in those forums which are simply stuck. As the meetings were virtual, Minister, it wasn't the water, it wasn't the brand of tea and biscuits, it was the shared determination to solve problems which made those forums work. You must take a hand, Minister, and use your influence with the relevant stakeholders to speed these forums along. Our members deserve the urgency and the purpose to be brought to their issues too. And one word of caution, as you did mention it, we certainly don't want the new oversight group to interfere with the existing forums or to add an unnecessary layer of further delay in advancing our claims and our issues. One issue rescued, we hope, from the mire after years of inertia is that of the organisation design of ETBs. Having finally moved past the unacceptable and frankly daft idea that only the upper echelons needed to be designed at all, we look forward to continue engagement in the various agreed strands. Given that the need for this work arose in 2013, we will look for real impetus as well as clarity on your department's place in the outcome. Unfortunately, the vacuum pertaining for almost a decade has seen ETBs and their managements using public funds to structure independently in any manner they wish. Speculative discussion about the FET College of the future must not be allowed to deflect from consideration of the FET College of the present Minister and the need for clear policy and strategy on enrolments and funding, as well as the staffing and allocations that are necessary, including the implications for our middle management. This must be a national strategy devised with the full participation and cooperation of the Union and other key stakeholders. While our members in VITAS, Minister, continue to provide essential service and the TUI remains committed to protecting those members' terms and conditions, including allowances, ETBs are already unilaterally beginning to dismantle this service. Minister, you must rein in such damaging unilateralism in the ETB sector. Never more evident than in the ETBI's strategy statement published just last December. Your department, Minister, you will have been relieved to note, was considered a stakeholder, unlike the sector's unions, the parents, the students, who were all absent entirely from the strategy. We have seen previously where the absence of oversight can lead to in ETBs. Control and oversight must come from the centre, Minister, from you and your department. Technological universities, properly funded, well-designed, adequately staffed, offer promise and opportunity to regions and communities across Ireland. The TUI remains committed to full engagement in shaping that new technological university sector. Our worry is the commitment of those who should engage with us, both to the consultation and negotiation necessary to such reform and to maintaining the values and identity nurtured over decades in RTCs and IoTs, which must now be passed on to the successor technological universities. We stress, Minister, that we are expecting to participate in the design of a sector. The formation of independent republics attempting to operate outside the national IR forums will be resisted, and we remind you and your department of your responsibility to uphold the agreed IR framework. Engagement and negotiation, driven from the ground up by frontline lecturers who know and understand what works and what doesn't, must be at the heart of organisational design for our TUs. Not overpaid consultants with little understanding of what they might carelessly trample underfoot. The TUI is ready to engage on behalf of our members and to reach agreements which protect local interests while allowing our new TUs to thrive. Amidst Ireland's 100 years of bungled and inadequate regional policy, our RTCs and IoTs have shone like bright metal on sullen ground, quite possibly Ireland's most successful regional initiative. Unwise policy, poor design, governing bodies or presidents, unclear on the precious nature of the legacy they inherit, cannot be allowed to dim that light, or indeed to engineer a move away from the educational model unequalled in providing opportunity to those groups underrepresented in third level education. Such a loss of focus may bring mission drift and threaten the decades-long adherence of successive governments to the binary system of third level education, with the potential of enormous damage to the diversity, inclusivity and regional focus to which the sector makes such an immense contribution. Whether accepted or not, applications to join the Irish Universities Association, no friend to our sector historically, do not reassure us that the future trajectory has been safely mapped. Fragmentation may be a precursor to loss of identity and dismantling much of the essence that has built us up to be technological universities in the first place. As the responsible minister and department you must lead, must exercise necessary oversight. Legislation alone will not suffice to protect our identity. While being in favour of collaboration and connectedness, it must be remembered that the TUI was merely shown the Tern report, not invited to help shape it. Tomorrow, our third-level delegates will debate the adoption of a TUI policy and strategy for technological universities. It is our genuine belief that notwithstanding the content of the TU Act and work since by Tern and elsewhere, the identity and a vision for the Irish Technological University remains elusive and ill-defined. The TUI will make our contribution as constructively and forcefully as ever, and will insist on real engagement on a question which is central to whether TUs will indeed deliver their promise and their potential. At government insistence, it was a requirement that IoTs merge in order to form a technological university, at which point the government took its hand from the tiller and essentially allowed the sector's presidents to shape vital educational infrastructure. Few national reconfigurations of such scale and scope have ever been the subject of so random and unstructured a process. Little wonder as the music stops on the 1st of May with the establishment, the very welcome establishment of the Southeast TU, that two IoTs will still be standing. Given the clear direction of travel for the sector towards TUs, with its beginnings in the Port Report 15 years ago, we can rightly lament local decisions and revisions in IADT Dunleary or in Dundalk IT, but the need for central guidance and direction is pressing. Minister, we are not asking you to force these IoTs into a TU, but we absolutely expect you to dismiss comprehensively pie-in-the-sky fantasies of university status arising some other way. And we expect you to be uncommonly encouraging of acceptance by an existing TU of any Section 38 application that arises. On a happier note, the TUI is delighted with progress towards the incorporation of St Angela's with Atlantic TU. Our recent ballots across the 4 branches overwhelmingly in favour of the MOU is testimony to the sense of solidarity and national cohesion which the TUI at least brings to the process, and indeed to the hard work of the TUI negotiating teams in the West and Northwest, mirroring the success and the hard work by the teams around the country. We thank you and your department for the work allowing positive updates on the mechanism and the legislation, which will allow, in time for September, what we see as another crucial step in the forging of the TU sector. Especially welcome given St Angela's recent history and the real value its staff and programmes can bring to Atlantic TU. Thank you also that the strong representations of the TUI were heeded regarding the composition of governing bodies of TUs. Proposed changes under the HEA bill would have undermined democracy in our TUs and breached the May 2017 agreement, which forms the basis of TUI's engagement in the TU process. The continuation of our current election processes and arrangements is greatly welcomed. Minister, while doing our best to avail of the opportunity afforded by sectoral bargaining to correct historic injustices, let us be clear that the TUI, it views sectoral bargaining as a deeply unjust process, which hopefully will never be repeated. An analysis of the data and the size of the available fund did not support progress in any of our claims in further education. But in higher education, the removal of remaining pay scale inequalities and 2 incremental credit claims are under consideration. We seek your assistance, Minister, in promoting a fair and reasonable approach, that the necessary calculations come forward from employers, and in particular, that the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform does not stymie the process with illogical impositions and assertions, including the notion of cross-sectoral impacts for claims which very clearly affect our grades alone. With a reminder, Minister, that we are seeking to spend our own money diverted from a long overdue 1% pay increase, which would only scratch the surface of current inflation. The balmiest idea floated from deeper is that any portion of the 1% directed to a fund to pay for the first of our incremental credit claims must continue to be lost forever, even after the claim is paid for. We are trying to solve problems, Minister, and bearing the cost ourselves. Absurd rubbish that solves nothing, in fact, that would prevent reasonable solutions, must be cleared out of the way. We look to you, Minister, to bring sense to bear so that the 15-year injustice around LCR 18366 can at last be ended. As this national agreement nears its end, Minister, its modest pay rises are entirely swallowed up by inflation, as the TUI predicted. National pay policy must address legitimate public sector demands regarding the cost of living. All the worse because of the continuing housing crisis, which continues to drive rents and home ownership out of reach. And we are pleased to hear what you said about movement on that by the end of this year. Our members in Youth Reach, Minister, have been heartened by the attention and the enthusiasm you've demonstrated for a programme that makes an admirable contribution to Ireland's outstanding record of keeping young people engaged in education. While welcoming the recent progress made in successfully concluding the incremental credit element of our claim, we will pursue what remains. As you've noticed, parity of esteem and fairness are central to all TUI considerations, both for the terms and conditions of our members and no less for our students, some of whose Youth Reach facilities continue to be shamefully inadequate. As an alternative second-level provision, continued close links, services and supports from the Department of Education must be maintained into the future. A further point of intersection of the concerns of the two departments is the negative impact of the second year of the Professional Masters of Education on teacher supply. Interested parties must do all in their power to ease that crisis. The highest calibre educators are needed for Ireland to meet the challenges of the future. And the needless impediment of this second year of high fees and lost earnings must be removed. Also requiring radical surgery, as you've noted in your address, is the CAO point system and the enormous and undue pressures that arise from it. Besides a retreat from our national obsession with what are viewed as high-status third-level courses, we need consistent processes and transparency around decision-making on capacity and entry requirements to deliver fairer outcomes for students and indeed the HEIs themselves. Further education's place on the CAO system must enjoy parity of esteem with higher education, making clear, as you've brought forward, the state's ability to use both sectors to best meet students' individual needs. The importance of further education, both for its own value and as a route into higher education, is too often overlooked. Your department will hopefully do as you've set out today and live up to its responsibility to promote and advance further education and to deepen and enhance its links to IITs and TUs in particular. The valuable, viable pathways for students to transfer and progress from one to the other needs to be developed and expanded. And we, Minister, we're ready to engage with you as experts across both further and higher education in forging that new future. We are happy, Minister, to see other TUI priorities reflected in your own, particularly in the improved visibility and the greater recognition you afford to apprenticeship. Long overdue rebalancing of consideration and value of available career pathways will benefit many. The promotion of all options with the key involvement and engagement of guidance counsellors and the correct balance and proper integration regarding what appears in the CAO system will be essential. With a view to ensuring the best experience for students, the most up-to-date knowledge coming to the labour market, and the best possible profile and reputation for our system, the TUI will continue to seek significant improvement in the methodologies to update both the curriculums and the assessment in apprenticeship. The objectives and ambition of the action plan for apprenticeship are welcome, and we hope the establishment of the National Apprenticeship Office will help to drive the expanded vision and scope for apprenticeship at the heart of the plan. As a key party and a passionate advocate for the education of apprentices, the TUI should be more involved. The ideological zeal for so-called competency-based governments has never struck the TUI to be either as wise or as apolitical as its advocates claim. In the simplest, most practical terms, people who need to be in the room end up excluded. Not for the first time, Minister, we point to the absence of a TUI voice on significant boards, undermining properly informed decision-making. In particular, we insist, and not for the first time, Minister, that the TUI must be represented on the board of SOLAS. This has been reinforced to me today from the very front line of our provision in this area. by that real concern that we are going to follow the poor practice, the poor decisions that were made in other jurisdictions, and which were only unwound when Ireland was itself held up as the correct model for how to deal with the traditional craft apprentices. So this is a matter that does require real urgency, Minister. In closing, Minister, I must refer again to our adult literacy tutors. The TUI examined the potential of the sectoral bargaining process to advance the issues still outstanding from the Chairman's note. Regrettably, as the necessary data eventually came forward, it became clear that the process was inadequate for so wide-ranging a claim and would merely have brought a redirection of the 1% increase for members back to themselves without really making progress. Our members have seen enough of procrastination and delay, and we repeat now what is becoming mantra. An offer needs to be made, as recommended by the Labour Court more than 2 years ago now. The then assertion by the employer side of being constrained by FEMPI legislation has now lost any currency or credibility. The outstanding issues must be addressed, and generously addressed, in recognition of the dedicated service and the value of the work undertaken by these members who've waited for too long for decent terms and conditions. Minister, the shameful continuation of the need for hard-working professionals to sign on to social welfare for periods of the year, it must end, and it must end now. We look forward, Minister, to continued work with you and with your department. And you're right, we will be both robust and professional in all of our dealings. Our advice is very clear. Give consultation and negotiation with us a real chance, because the other way is always much, much, much harder. We'll make sure of that. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, colleagues.